Good morning, guys.
How you doing?
Good morning.
Yeah. We're like already in it, and we do this all the time. We don't hit record.
We broke
early
our own
enough.
rule, man.
Yeah, we broke our own rule. But just to bring everybody else up to speed, we're talking about the masterclass with deadmau5, and it was just such a fascinating thing. And I love the tee up for today's conversation because he really did look at music visually and had nothing to do with musicality, although he knew how that visual representation tied to the musicality, right? And so the way he looks at music is literally the opposite of how most musicians do, which is like, oh, I hear this thing and I'm doing this thing. No, he's like, no, I see this thing and I know how to change it by how it looks. It's just wild.
In the MIDI roll in Ableton, yeah.
Yeah. And I guess we didn't have tools like that, but as we were kind of getting into, like, I found it kind of interesting when my timing's a little off, like maybe, because look, who's got perfect timing? I don't. I'm not a professional musician, but you got that little snap to timing button and you're like, sweet, fix that problem up. And you're not off by more than a few half tones, like you're not off by much. It's not like, your timing could be split second off, but snapping it to like a quarter note does sound a lot better.
It can help. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's what's fascinating about electronic music tools. I didn't know I was a musician until I got a drum machine. Because when I was in band class or orchestra, I didn't take any of those classes because I had no interest in woodwinds or playing a trumpet or piano. I certainly wasn't a singer. So I just thought I wasn't a musician. But I got a drum machine when I was 19. I was like, I am a musician. I just haven't found the right instrument yet.
That's a great way of looking at it.
You know what's amazing when like Jason, we didn't even introduce you, and you kind of
we should back up.
Our first question is kind of like, what's the backstory?
Sure.
And you kind of started, which is like exactly where we start. So it's so great, man.
But that's like a real good way, like a good look at yourself, right? And a good realization, because I think a lot of people find themselves, like I have 2 art degrees myself, and like I can't tell you how many people like, I can't draw a straight line without a ruler. I'm like, well,
who needs a straight line?
Yeah, when was drawing a straight line the bellwether of being an artist? Like, I mean,
fine art.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. Who cares? I don't fucking draw a straight line without a ruler either. And but like so many people get discouraged because they just don't. I think that they're associating like incorrect vocabulary with what they're trying to describe, and it's just not. It's great that you found that, and we're able to be sober enough to be like, no, I am a musician. I love, So is that kind of like, is that your sort of genesis moment where you're like, no, I'm off. Like now I know I got this new toy to play with and let's figure this out.
There's 3 different threads that I can go into I think will be interesting. One is a background in meditation and being a psychonaut. One is a background. Yeah, Tom likes that.
Already loving this conversation. Yeah.
Simpatico.
One is a background in electronic music production, and one is a background in computer programming. And that's what led to this work, is those 3 paths merging. So
I'm clearing my schedule for the rest of the day. That's all we're doing is talking. Yeah.
That's about
Joe Rogan's got nothing on us now.
In middle school.
I own a production. I own a digital production company, so we do computer programming for 25 years. So like, that's why I was laughing, and that's why Tom is probably also smirking. He's like, "Oh shit, here goes Matt.
Here we go."
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. Got it.
Since we're on music array, I'll start with that, and then
let's do that.
To meditation.
Yeah.
So I dabbled a little bit before I got that drum machine. My brother had a guitar, and we had like it was a Boss Hyperfuzz. And so we would just mess around with the amp and feedback. And, it was the 90s, early 90s. So Nirvana was out, and we were just interested in that type of, distortion and feedback. But I couldn't play it. I didn't know. I think I learned a couple of chords on the guitar from my dad, but really very, very basic stuff. And it became more interesting to me, just happenstance. There was this really good video program when I was in high school. So this is like VHS, Amiga toaster, 2 source VHSs to 1 destination. You do like, effects. And in that program, I really blossomed. I'd never had the chance to make films before. And I made a series of art films. And in those art films, I needed some sort of musical score. And so I started messing around with whatever I could find in the house. So one of it was the guitar and the amp. Another one was this broken record player where the hand, I could go between 2 different sources. And essentially I was using it as a mixer, like a crossfader on a mixer. It was like legitimately broken, and started to really enjoy scoring. And so that was my first experience with music. So this is probably 92, 93, late high school. I dropped out. I started community college right away. And in 95, so I would have been a freshman in college, I heard a demo tape. I was in a rave scene. I was going to raves in the Midwest. I grew up in Iowa. I was going to raves in Minneapolis, Chicago. I heard this. I'd been hearing mixtapes, so I knew what DJs were. All my friends were buying vinyl and, DJing house and techno. It was the first time it wasn't a DJ tape, it was a demo tape. And it was this gabber hardcore producer from Chicago named Delta 9. And it was explained to me that, yeah, it was great. Yeah, Delta 9.
That used to go with that term.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I know that phrase. And this tape was just song after song, so it wasn't mixed. And I asked about it, and it was explained to me, this is just some guy that's not a record label. It's not a major studio in LA or New York. It's just some guy with a drum machine, a 303 and a sampler, in Chicago making music. And I thought, can I just get a drum machine and start making music? And that's how open the techno and rave scene was in the 90s. If you could get your hands on some gear, you were a producer. And so I found a used drum machine. It's probably like $100. Surprised they were even selling it, but it was a Yamaha RX-7. And that's when I understood I was a musician. I had no experience prior of playing any sort of musical training or other instruments. But when I got a drum machine, there was something about the loop, and this ties into my brainwave work later, of making repetitive beats. And in a way, it was therapy for me. So there was something about creating and shaping these loops that would turn off the chatter in my head. So it was an early form of meditation in a way as well. And from that, it's been, that was 95, I got that. So we're coming on 30 years of music production. And particularly, I love making beats, and I love the repetition of it. So that, I can get more details later, but that's the background of music. That's how I got started.
I love that, because we were talking before we hit record on how people might not sort of know that they are a musician or could be. And I think a guy with that sort of start, you got to be just fucking overwhelmed with the potential that's out there now, like between like AI stuff and obviously you can't throw a rock in some of those circles without hitting 6,000 loops that are pre-made and done. And God, can you imagine being your 19-year-old self in this environment? Come on.
I think it is a disadvantage. So at the time I was building my studio, I just got one piece of gear at a time. So I got a drum machine and used it for months and months and months and really mastered it. And then I got one keyboard and then did everything I could with it. And I had a friend who bought a whole studio at once. He was a lucrative local pharmaceutical distributor.
Yeah. And that's like, a great way of saying that. His name wasn't Delta 9, was it?
Yeah.
And so anyways, he came across a good amount of money quick, and he bought all the gear I had acquired slowly. He bought his own gear, and he never did anything. It was too many options at once. And so, if I get Ableton and it says, hey, download, 6 gig of samples, I don't do it. I would rather have 30 samples and push myself creatively with limitations.
Well, that's what deadmau5 was going on to in his masterclass. He's like, Firestarter, we all know that song from, I think that was definitely the 90s too, right? Prodigy.
Prodigy.
Yep.
Yeah, he goes, the loop was called something like Firestarter. Like they named the song the loop that they downloaded. It was basically, it wasn't their loop. They didn't make it. And he was kind of smirking when he said it. He goes, yeah, I could download this, and I could even name a song after the exact name of the loop. But I could also just spend a half hour fucking around with patch cables on. He's got an analog synth as well. And it's like, and now no one's ever heard this sound before. This is truly unique.
Yeah.
And it didn't take me all that much longer to figure out. And then I could ideate a sort of a song or a mix out of this new sound I've made, rather than trying to shove a pre-recorded thing into a square hole, round hole, whatever, you know what I mean? Such a cool way of thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, because that could be part of the creative process itself, is finding that sound. And then once you find it, wow, what do I do with this cool thing that I've discovered, right?
Yeah, that's something I emphasize with my students. One of the classes is create your own custom sound kit. So take a field recorder, take your phone, just hit your body, hit the mic, traffic, percussion, go to a cafe, whatever it is, and pull sounds out from that. If you're making music with those sounds, no other producer has.
Correct. Right.
If you grab a sample pack, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of other producers are using those exact same sounds. So if you do want a unique sound, that said, you can also dive into a genre by using an established sound. So like the amen break is fundamental breakcore and a lot of breaks. I'm sure you'd recognize it if you heard it. And a lot can be done if you give yourself the creative limitation of, I'm just going to use this break. I'm going to distort it. I'm going to warp it. I'm going to pitch it. I'm going to chop it up. And what can I do with that limitation, knowing all these other people are using it? So there's different ways, but I think it is important to focus in, create creative limitation in order to really find your voice. If I give 20 students the assignment to remix a 30-second loop, I learn more about who they are individually than if I just say, make a song.
Right. And that totally makes sense. Spoken like a true teacher, actually. I mean, it's like, I joke about art school all the time. I'm like, they're like, here's a rock, a stick, and a blade of grass. I need you to do something with this. You're like, what the fuck am I supposed to do?
Sounds like performance art to me.
Exactly. Right. But it does change the way you think. And I love what your observation was about it being a disadvantage, because I don't think I've ever heard it articulated like that. But you're absolutely right, because with all those options, I mean, you got to figure it out if you've got a stick, a rock, and a blade of grass, right? Like you just got to figure it out. If you've got infinite stuff, what are you figuring out? Like
it's almost like choice overload. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Then you get caught up in the like, did I use the right, drum loop? Did I use the right, thing? And then you're like in your head about it. And you're like, well, who gives a fuck what you did? Just, does it look good? Does it sound good? Is it like what you were looking for? If not, then you're not done. If so, then great. It doesn't matter what you call it or whatever, right? I had a music
if I get a new synth.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go.
If I have a new synth, I used to go through the presets one at a time and write down which ones I like. It's total waste of time. It's just, there's just too many. So if I just randomly scroll to one and be like, I'm going to make a loop on that today, it's going to be way more creative, way more interesting.
Well, I like that idea of like consciously confining yourself to a certain area and then saying, what can I do in this little square,
To make it work.
Yeah.
But I also like that there's like a lot of value. And I think this is where I think the younger programmers I work with, or like my kids who are like, neck deep in the TikTok generation, right? Like that sense of experimentation and whimsy when it comes to these things isn't there, right? Like it's just different, right? It's morphed into sort of like a take what I've got in front of me and kind of rearrange it versus like, yeah, you're right. Maybe that was a waste of time going through every preset, but the process of going through every preset was not a waste of time. The process of doing that was absolutely fundamental to your growth, because now you didn't have to do that. Like, I mean, I know, it's a simple output, but
of course.
And that process, and I think that that sort of curiosity, I got to imagine, has a huge influence on what you're doing now with all the visual stuff. And
absolutely. Absolutely. Do you want me to talk about the meditation?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's time for the second pillar.
Interview?
Yeah, second.
You
second
just go,
pillar.
man. We'll just follow along.
So Jason, what do you think? The meditation thread, I think you'll both be into. So some context is that, I grew up in Iowa, primarily a Christian community, Midwest. But my dad taught both my brother and I about all the world religions when we were kids. My brother was too hyper to sit still in church. And so my dad attempted to have these Sunday services at home. Still, they only lasted like 10 minutes. But when giving those, he would mention Lao Tzu and Buddha, Krishna and Confucius. I just thought that was like Jesus and his buddies. I had no idea it was all these different world religions. And so when I got into
can we make a t-shirt about that? Jesus and his buddies.
I almost commissioned my tattoo artist to do a rendition of what I called gods playing poker. So instead of the dogs, all the gods.
That's cool.
I might have to ping him for that.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
And so once I took there was a class I took in undergrad called Eastern Religions. I was like, why is so much of this familiar? So I was already primed to be open to these ideas. And my dad had taught me informally, a lot of different ideas with Taoism. So going with the flow of something, and that's something I still live by today. So if I find myself getting too willful and trying to force a solution, I don't do it. I'm like, all right, where's the flow? And that allows me to move very quickly, come up with new ideas quickly, let go of things that aren't working, and just keep moving forward and forward. And then the other thing in college was through the rave scene in the Midwest. Some people know about this, some people don't. But in rural Iowa, in Fairfield, Iowa, there's this international meditation university for transcendental meditation. Yeah, totally. So it's the Maharishi International University, MIU. And so the idea was that all these people from the coast, from California, New York, New England, could come to the Midwest and have a quiet life and get deeper into their meditation. And so you have all these different people over the years coming to this small town in Iowa. It's about an hour and a half from where I grew up. And, you could just look up who's in TM, and these people have spent time in Iowa at this university taking classes or workshops. But a lot of families moved there permanently and wanted to raise their kids in this transcendental meditation high school, and then some of them went on to college. So as it turns out, as the rave scene comes up in Iowa, these kids are interested in techno music as well. So I start meeting them at raves. They start driving up to Cedar Rapids and Iowa City, so my hometown and my college town. And everyone's like, where are you from? Like, why are you kids so cool? Like, how do you have all these city connections and you're from this really small town in southern Iowa? And through that, I started learning about meditation and Indian and Vedic culture. I started learning about vegetarianism. And I didn't learn TM officially, but just being around them, I started being exposed to the ideas and really made meditation accessible. There was one time I was talking to my friend Jenny, and I said, what's meditation like? And she said, sometimes I just sit and think about like what I'm going to eat tonight. I was like, oh, okay. It doesn't have to be this mystical, magical thing. Like if I just sit still for a few minutes, I'm good. Like that is a benefit, right? I don't have to have a perfect mantra or have a clear mind. Just sitting still during a day is great, even if my brain is busy. Like who cares? So I started to try to meditate. It was right after New Year's 96. So, went to a big rave, did a ton of drugs. I was detoxing. I was like, all right.
I was at a fish show that night in Madison Square Gardens, actually. So
Amazing. I can only imagine we're going through a similar detox.
Yeah, yes.
So it's like January 2nd, January 3rd, and I sit down, I try to meditate. And it's my first time sitting still. And of course, I have this intensely sensational meditation because of all these drugs are leaving my system. And I thought, this I can do. Like, this feels amazing. And slowly just started hearing like a mantra in my head and started using that. And again, never learned TM officially, but started to sit and started to create a practice. And then that spring, so it had been May of 96, I was having a bad LSD trip with a friend. And we had watched this, I don't remember what, it was a Jeff Goldblum film where he's like Satan and he has a therapist and he's trying to convince his therapist to kill him. Probably some like deep cut B movie. But we watched.
In my head, that's a comedy, but I could see on LSD.
Yeah.
So we watched this thinking it would be fun. I mean, it was part of the LSD culture, and our group of friends was not to like trip and like be nice to each other, but to like push each other and try to make each other break. It's interesting psychological training. It's like SEAL training or something, or SEER training. But anyways, so we watched this horror film. And we feel terrible afterwards. And we're like, how do we lighten the vibe? We should like watch a cartoon or something. And so we turn on the TV and, I don't have cable. It's literally the 3 channels. It's, 96.
Yeah, right.
And we turn it to a channel and Jeff Goldblum's on one of the channels. And we are convinced that he has left the VHS tape and entered the TV.
It makes absolute sense.
And
I'm following you.
It was like,
totally get that.
We have to get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
So we go outside and we're just despondent. We're just like bad trip, super low vibe. And at a certain point, I'm looking at my friend Rachel and I'm thinking, and I start to say to her, I was like, I know you're real and I know I'm real. Let's just focus on each other. And what happens, we slowly, through this oscillation of talking to each other and focusing on each other, we didn't need a cartoon. We didn't need something light. We just need something real. And as we started to focus on each other, we started to speed up, looking back, our brainwave frequencies. And we went from this really low, dark, scary vibe and just spiraled up in a total state of ecstasy. And it ended up being one of my best trips ever.
That sounds awesome. Again, your sense of clarity and capacity to move with that clarity is impressive, because I know so many people that can't do that.
Especially in your late teens, early 20s there. That's damn
lucky.
impressive for that age. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't have a guru. I didn't have training. It was an ayahuasca session. It was really like a dangerous form of like self-learning, but it worked. And, the sun rose that morning. She went to bed and I knew exactly where to go in my mind to meditate. So I had learned from this LSD trip, and I sat down, and it's a specific meditation where I sort of focus on myself and I sort of focus on something in front of me. But more importantly, I focus on the space in between where the relationship lies. And I would do that, and I just rocketed out of my body into a state of transcendence. And when the drugs were off, the method kept working. And so that was my first meditation method. I would just use that over and over. And it was so rewarding that I started to get a daily practice, so 10, 20 minutes each day throughout college.
I have to ask, not with the LSD this time? The daily is, you're not dropping tabs every day?
No, the daily is, I was doing a lot of other stuff, but it was my respite. In many ways, it helped me eventually get sober. Were these experiences with meditation. There was a few times later where I would trip alone and work on music and art and meditate, but having that knowledge and then peaking, it felt a little dangerous. It was like too far, too fast.
I see.
And so it was a bit safer for me to trip with other people, or focusing on music was fine. And what was interesting about music and LSD was that when I worked on music and LSD, I made music that was about 2 to 3 years into my future in terms of my clarity and my skill set. And then the drugs would wear off and I'd come back to my normal music making ability. But it gave me this clarity to move a little bit into the future. Now, if I smoked pot and made music, I'd listen the next day and I'd be like, oh, this is like 2 to 3 years back.
Right.
It would just be sluggish and like bad composition. And in the moment, I was like, I think I've got something here. And I'll listen the next day.
I'm a fucking genius.
Total dud the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's funny. I had a coach a couple years ago that we had a recurring conversation about sort of the differences between LSD and cannabis, and his observations were pretty much spot on with what you're saying. And I got to say, I'm a little torn about it, because I think there's days where I'm totally on that team where I'm like, fuck, this is like definitely regressive. It's definitely, reductive. It's not, it's not really exciting or energetically new. But then there's other times where I'm like, I was, somebody told me once about jazz musicians. They're like, jazz musicians know all the notes on a trumpet, guitar, piano, whatever they're playing. Smoking a lot of weed just helps them sort through the noise and just play the notes that they know they want to play. They just need to clear out the clutter. And sometimes I do think that when I get high, it's doing that. Like it's not necessarily making my ideas better, and in some cases might be a stagnation of a previous idea. But at least it's getting me out of my own way so that I could experience or interact with that idea at that moment in time, which I do think opens up other connective tissue to other things that might actually be sort of that spark of genius, if you will, or whatever the next thing is. So I kind of vacillate, right? Like it's a tough thing for me to sort of like jump in on, because I'm like, I don't know. I kind of depends on the day for me, right?
I'll be first to say that LSD daily is not like a smooth life.
No, not at a recreational dose, but and this is actually what I love about where we're at in evolution, is now we know that you don't have to dump a whole can of gasoline on a fire. You could just put a drop and it still is impactful, but you don't have to like dive all the way into the rabbit hole, right? Like, and I think that's where it's kind of fascinating now, because Silicon Valley was essentially built on LSD, and so like, look what happened there. Good or bad, it was different, right?
It was innovative,
world changing. Yeah,
it was world changing one way or the other, right? I mean, so
I agree.
So your meditation's on an upward spiral. It seems you kind of clarifying there. There was a third pillar there.
And just to finish that thought, first trip was 94, last trip was 98. And
so you were in a pretty tight window.
Yeah. And one of the things that I thought was fascinating was, you'll probably relate, but a lot of times a trip, particularly a longer form trip like LSD, would have a lesson. Like, what's the lesson of, I'd get 100%. Some sort of insight about my life, or learn about some sort of dynamic of reality or physics. Often that same truth wouldn't apply the next weekend or 2 weekends later. That was the frustrating, is that the truth kept changing, because I would think, oh, I found the truth, and then my life would change, or the world would change, and that truth wouldn't persist. So I kept learning new things and understanding I was here to learn new things. By the end, I would say the last 6 months, and I had trouble with all sorts of other drugs and had friends that overdosed, and there was a lot of motivations to hit the brakes. But the last 6 months of I started tripping again, and the lesson each time was, stop coming here. There's nothing more to learn here. And the first time I got that message, I thought, I just want to make sure. So I kept trying.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah. Well, hold on. Maybe 3 times.
Exactly. So I kept
trying,
kept trying, and then had a full-on ego death in May of '98, and that was the last one. You know,
that was enough. You feel like you're still, how do we say this, assimilating that into who you are, or do you feel like you've done that and you're...
There's a lot of assimilation, but also, you know, like with an ego death and tripping that hard, there was a brief out-of-body experience. I swear I was like downloading information about like how to make UFOs, and like, I mean, it was just really a cosmic download, which there's no way I could have retained and processed. It was like a fire hose of information going through my consciousness. So what I will say, which is persists through the work today, is how profound, it's a balance. So how profound transcendent experiences can shape someone for the rest of their life. So that one moment, so for example, if we talk about the neurofeedback and these musical experiences of hearing your own brain, I've had people put it on and, 30 seconds later, they have this experience that's going to change them for the rest of their lives. On the flip side, there's also something really important to daily practice, because I'm not going to be on a high horse or a spiritual beam every day. I mean, a lot of days it's just, I got to crank through some dumb emails and go to the bank and whatever. And how do I maintain some sort of practice daily? And that's where something as mundane and powerful as a daily meditation can be helpful, where it's just, I need a foundation and those peaks are important. And as I've talked with more neuroscientists over the years, those peaks are more possible if I have a foundation. So if I'm not sleeping well, if I'm not meditating, I'm less likely to have transcendent experiences. And I'll talk about brainwaves a little bit if this gets too...
Yeah, we're almost at that point of the interview anyway. So yeah,
Great.
For sure.
So if I get good sleep, I've got good theta levels. So theta is a low frequency. It's a dreamy state. It's a cozy, comfortable, subconscious state. Where you are as you're falling asleep. And when you're dreaming, that's a theta frequency. Delta is below it, and that's just blackout sleep, body repair. That's when your brain is repairing. You're not dreaming. That's just the lowest frequency, and that's like core functionality of being a human being. So delta is at the bottom. Step up is theta, which is dreaming, and a step up is alpha, and that's meditation. And so if I'm meditating daily, I've got my gas tank of alpha and theta is full. And if I've got a good amount of alpha and theta, when they ride up and down, just imagine them as these like big ocean waves. Gamma, which is this top fastest frequency, and that is transcendence, that is empathy, joy, having insight on your life, like zooming out and kind of seeing the big picture. Those are all gamma states. And in order for gamma to get from 0 to 100, it's much easier if this really fast, small wave rides on top of these bigger alpha or theta waves.
Oh, interesting.
So as theta goes up, it gets gamma up to like 50. And so gamma just has to go from 50 to 100 rather than 0 to 100. And so the more I'm rested, the more I'm meditating, the more likely I'm going to have these transcendent experiences.
It's kind of a rising tide raises all ships.
That's exactly it. That's a great metaphor for it. Something like hallucinogens, what it does is that chemically, it pushes up those amplitudes in gamma. So you don't have to have that rest. But then you also have the crash. That's what, I end up getting sober in '98. And one of the books I really gravitated towards early on was Be Here Now with Ram Dass. And he talked about the issue with hallucinogens is they can take you to these amazing places. However, you always come down. And what do you do with it?
As Tim Ferriss said, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? Like if you're not paying for it one way, you're paying for it another way. Like that's just a reality of humans, I guess.
Yep. And you pay for the speed and the depth of it through the crash. Whereas, what Ram Dass did was switched over to yoga and a meditation practice. And you can get to those same states, but you're not going to get there in 3 hours. But you might get there in 3 weeks or 3 months.
You know what's amazing? I heard this story about Ram Dass when he first went over to India, right? Before he changed his name, and I forget who his guru was, very famous guy. But, you know, the guru said, yeah. Said, do you have any drugs on you? And he goes, yeah. He pulls out this whole little pocket of LSD and his little tin, and he goes, give it to me. He threw the whole thing in his mouth and then walked away. And Ram Dass is going, oh my God, this is going to blast this guy off the planet. And he goes, nothing happened.
Nothing happened.
Nothing happened.
Like he wondered if he like tossed him, you know, over his shoulder.
Over his shoulder, so
They did it again. Still nothing happened. So 2 instances, yeah.
So why is that? Just because he had such command over his state, it didn't like
maybe his gamma brainwaves were flying high that whole time.
Gamma was so high. I mean, yeah, like what do you think? What do you think causes that? Because I mean, that's ego death for most people right there.
Absolutely. My guess would be, so one of the things that LSD does is opens the filter. So normally, you know, when right now I'm looking at a computer, I'm aware that I have a mic, I see your faces, but there's all this other information. I'm in a room, you know, there's a window to my left and, you know, I see trees and sunlight. I'm blocking out most of that information in order to focus and talk. And what some hallucinogens do is open the filter and makes it impossible for me or more difficult for me to focus on specific things. So my filter is opened up through that chemical. So I'm guessing this guru, his filter was already open. So if you have a chemical that opens the filter and you're already there, what's to open? That's my guess.
No, and that jibes with like a lot. I mean, I was talking to a pharmacology, and we actually have a pharmacologist coming on the show to talk about like the actual sort of like chemical stuff of this. But it's been explained to me, and my current understanding is that by the time you're actually quote unquote tripping, you actually have nothing left in your body by way of LSD. Your serotonin pathways and production, just everything flooded. Is overdoing what they need to do. Like your receptors are like on point. You're flooding with the serotonin, and like you don't have actually any narcotic in you. Like it's just sense. So yeah, your guess is probably pretty close one way or the other, just because, you know, if you don't have any anyway, then that stuff, I think the half-life is like 30 minutes or 20 minutes or something. It's not long. So 45 minutes into a trip, you should have nothing left in your body by way of like LSD. Now, we're going to like
dirty LSD, you might still
yeah. So that's the different thing, right? When you and I were taking LSD in the 90s, like it wasn't just LSD. It was LSD and it was cut with like maybe methamphetamines, maybe a little MDMA, maybe a little cocaine, maybe a little heroin. I mean, who the fuck knows? I mean, honestly,
garbage.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, who knew? But now if you're just taking like, I mean, it's not hard to get your hands on pure MDMA, pure LSD, pure psilocybin, even like, you know, when you do those kinds of things, if they're right, and I can't wait to talk to the guy about this, but like, if that is true, that is actually a fairly interesting tidbit of information, right? Like you could take all this compound, be fucking blasted on another planet, and there's nothing in your system whatsoever that is influencing that. Like, that's a wild thought, man, because that means, to your point, to what we were just talking about, I should or could be able to endogenously induce that exact same state, because like when I'm in it, there's nothing there anyway.
That's right.
You know, right. And it's funny, we talked to a ketamine therapist last night.
Yeah.
Like literally just last night. And one of the things, you know, she was saying too, is like, just like knowing about these things and knowing how to get a glimpse into your inner workings and get rid of that sort of block of it is also part of the work, right? So like, yeah, you might not have tripped since 1998, but like you already did the work. You put it in, you've seen the other light. You can't go backwards. You can't unring the bell. Like there's no way of backtracking. So like, and like you said, the message for you was, you're done here, dude. Don't come back. No need, right?
But once those neural pathways were cut, I know they're possible.
Yeah. And that's where I think the real lesson is, right? Like, I mean, yeah. So
and I was lucky enough that when I did get sober, I started to have equally transcendent experiences like throughout the next few decades, and realized, oh wait, this wasn't just the chemical. This is an inherent part of being a human being.
Well, yeah, we talked last night about a shamanic breathing thing that Tom and I did. And I was tripping balls.
It's intense.
Except I was not, I mean, it was just me sitting there. And I mean, I was tripping balls. Like I was out on a fucking other planet, man. I mean, it was crazy.
We should probably do that again and just throw the muse on and just like open up the Mind app and just see what that looks like.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was intense, man. I mean, it was definitely the most intense trip I didn't have.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I've been looking at with my work is the term I was thinking of a few years ago to describe it is electro-psychedelic. So instead of using a chemical as a psychedelic, using an electronic system to create feedback loops.
That's amazing.
To reveal the mind, which is the term psychedelia, to reveal the mind.
So Matt's heard me talk about this a bunch, and I still haven't pulled the trigger on it. Partially because there's very few things Matt has ever said, hey, wait a minute, man. And he goes, did you see that disclaimer page? But originally this was called, it was dubbed by the media, the God helmet. And it is electromagnetic fields that they put over your brain. So somebody that was a student of Dr. Persinger that now is studying with him named Todd Murphy up in Canada has created what he calls the Shiva system. And the ability to induce these altered states of consciousness is kind of crazy. And this is an electromagnetic field. So it's very interesting that you're kind of coming at this from a slightly different angle, but you know, these kind of converging thoughts are cool to me.
And I've always chalked it up to like too much LSD in my system from 100 years ago, but like I'm an audiophile, like hardcore, like I've got really high-end studio monitors as my computer speakers. And when I throw on like SoundCloud into like a trance or electronica channel and I just hit go and hear what people are coming up with, it's super cool. But there are definite times where the visceral nature of those speakers hits me at the right frequency and I am like in another world. Like, and it's like, then the only thing I want to do is like pump up the volume a little bit, as they say, and it just gets it more, you know, like I can intensify that sort of experience. And then this happened to cut like earlier this week. I just found myself for about 15, 20 minutes, just stopping work. I just stared blankly at a computer screen while I just let the music sort of guide me. And it was sort of like I wish now that Tom said that, I'm like, fuck, I'll throw on the muse next time I do that and see what's going on there. But it was enough to stop me in my tracks. Like I was like, nope, this is what I need to do right now. And it was every bit of a psychedelic experience.
Some of the research I'm doing right now is looking at how different cultures use sound to induce meditative or transcendent states. Like how do we get to go up or go down? And both of the things that you mentioned, Tom, the electromagnetic fields and the Matt with music, you could categorize those as entrainment. So it's a signal from the outside world being pumped into the brain to try to get to a certain frequency or a certain state.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's the same theory with binaural beats and
Yeah. So we're working on a binaural beat guy coming on too, because I want to talk to somebody who just focuses on that as well. It's a pretty fascinating.
So there's this whole field of entrainment of how can we tailor this signal, and musicians have done this since before we even had language. Like, you know, how do we create music to create a certain vibe, you know, to impact, you know, the listeners. So even listening to music is brainwave entrainment. But to break down the elements, that's what I've been doing the past few years is, what does a repetitive beat do? What does a syncopated beat do? You know, how do you induce novelty or, you know, spike something in a beta range where you're more engaged? How do you take someone who's aggravated and slow them down into a peaceful state? You know, that's something I used to do routinely. I'd listen to this, it was a Mark Farina mix, probably listened to it hundreds of times on cassette. It was called Mushroom Jazz. And I would listen to that when I was too high. And what I was doing was I was using repetitive beats at a slow tempo to get me to wind down, you know, into a peaceful state when I was you know, activated or nervous. And so with entrainment, that's part of my work, which is the neurofeedback loop. So with neurofeedback, it's not just pumping in information into the brain. So it's not just taking music and putting it into the ears and getting it to the brain, but it's using sensors, using the Muse, or there's some other headsets I use as well, but using those sensors to see what's going on in the brain.
Yeah.
Let's sonify that in real time. And then the brain hears itself. And so it's a mirror. So for example, if I don't have a physical mirror, I don't really know what I look like. You guys can see me, but I don't know what I look like unless there's a mirror. You know, I can maybe feel my face and kind of get a sense. But as soon as I have a mirror, I know what I'm working with.
Right.
With brain and consciousness and the mind, we very rarely have instances where there's a mirror.
Yeah.
I'm in my consciousness, but I can't really see what it's doing. And so, you know, even kids as young as like middle school, I did a middle school pilot program, and they started to understand, oh, when I'm anxious, this is what it sounds like through musical neurofeedback. You know, this is what it looks like on this chart on this iPad app. And they started to learn, oh, I'm anxious. I can use these breathing techniques that my teacher taught me to start relaxing. And then the music changes and the visual changes. And for me, my first iteration of this was doing techno. So doing, you know, I was coming from a techno background. So can I do full techno sets just with my brain? Don't touch any of the knobs. Don't touch any of the buttons. Kind of X-Men style telekinesis. Do stuff with my brain.
Yeah.
Full Professor X.
Yeah.
Like Cerebra style.
Yeah.
Can I control the machine in front of me just through a Bluetooth connection between my brain?
Wait, Jason, can I ask, what was the spark? What was that initial thought? Like, was it just like, hey, this would be cool? Or, you know, where did that come from?
Sure. So 2014, from like 2009 to 2014, I started to explore other ways to make music besides Ableton or drum machine. You know, I'd been producing for a couple of decades at that point.
Yeah.
And I tried to experiment as much as possible with sound design and with genre. And I wanted to start looking at, is there a different way to compose rather than just using my hands and turning knobs and hitting buttons on these music machines that I used? So my first exploration was, I built a generative music app, and over time it would shape itself to me and the way that I made music. And I realized I had kind of fallen backwards into making a music AI system. This was, this was 10 years ago now. And so I used that for a while. Essentially, it was like a robot bandmate, generate all the sheet music. I chose the synthesizers and turned the knobs. And what I started to experience was that when you're in the studio and you're making a song and you have that just wonderful moment of creation where you're like, I've got something here. This is beautiful. Normally when that happens, I'm in the studio, maybe I'm working with someone else and we share that moment together. But by the time I record it and it comes out in a label, or I put it on vinyl or CD and then later, you know, MP3 or on a flash drive, and I perform it for an audience, that moment is 6 months ago, a year ago, you know, that moment of creation. And what I was able to do with this music AI was move that moment of creation and revelation to the moment that I'm performing. So I'm in a performance, I'm performing to a crowd, and the app is generating notes that sound like me. It's like a different version of me. It's almost like the LSD trip. It's like me 6 months from now or a year from now. And I turn over and I look at the app and I think, that's amazing. I've never heard this before. The audience has never heard this before. And we're all experiencing that moment of creation together. And so that was really the takeaway from this music AI. Unfortunately, this AI, it made this album, ended up calling it How to Play Dead. That the AI was called Refractions, and it made this album called How to Play Dead. It was so beautiful. I'm gonna brag about it because I didn't make it. The AI did. So my Frankenstein made this album that was so nostalgic and so beautiful and so human. It got onto a record label that I had been trying to get on for 15 years.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was this avant-garde, really cool label called Ant Zen in Germany. And I'd been sending demos and wanting, you know, I was like, if I get on this label, my career is made. So the AI gets on it. And I thought, I was butthurt, I was envious, and I thought, I'm not gonna work with AI anymore. So I stopped working with AI.
How crazy is that? Your baby.
Yes.
Yeah.
Frankenstein beat me.
Yeah.
Frankenstein beat me.
Now,
And can we find that on Spotify, by the way? Can we find that out?
Yeah. A weird technical question. Like, do you still get sort of credited with that because it was your creation? Like, I mean, is it your name on
the... You built the thing that built the thing.
My name is on it, yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say,
I did not write that sheet music. And that's an interesting credit thing, that's coming up more now with AI systems. Like, if I do the text prompt, do I get credit for the music? So
we had big discussions about that.
This is not a new question, though, man. Like, you probably don't know it, but you might. In the 90s, there was a guy, John Maeda, who was talking about digital art creation, right? And back in the 90s, we didn't have AI yet, but I got into this when I was using Macromedia Flash at the time, before it was even Adobe
Flash. At 12 years.
Yeah. So I used to teach Flash to ad agencies on how to use it, right? And it was like this weird gig that it was part of a job that I had back 100 years ago. But it was really fascinating to me that a variable could have variables, right? And I don't want to go down too far down the rabbit hole, but you very clearly get into a situation where you're like, all right, let's think 9-dimensionally about this. If I have a baby who has autonomy to create 2 new babies within a certain parameter, left and right, we'll call it, and then those babies have different autonomy to do different respawns, right? It doesn't take too long to create some really fucking cool shit. I mean, there's some really trippy shit that we made like back in the day. And I was like, well, I don't know. Am I like the artist doing this or not? Because I'm not really. I mean, in some cases, I wrote 1 line of code and then just sat back and watched what happened, right? Like, because I knew how to pull those levers to do it like that. And then Maeda had this book called Maeda on Maeda, and the thing was like fucking like 4 inches thick. It was a crazy hardcover, big ass book. But he was really back into the 80s talking about this, like, hey, look, yeah, we used to paint with a paintbrush, and that was a thing, and we draw with a pencil and whatever. But then like Photoshop came along, and before that, PageMaker came along. So now instead of doing glue ups to make posters for Coke, now I'm laying it out in PageMaker or Quark or whatever, and like there was a huge argument then. And I feel like we've had this argument every time a new set of tools come out, right? Like, so Quark diminished the perceived value of being a graphic designer because now you don't need a wax gun anymore. You don't need the dexterity that you used to need.
Mm-hmm.
But you can still make beautiful posters. And in many other ways, the posters were even more beautiful because the production value went up, because like you weren't bound by the laws of copy, cut and paste, literally.
Yeah.
And so like, okay, well, that doesn't make you not a graphic designer, in my view. It just makes you a denizen of the avant-garde, if you will. Like you are just embracing the tools that you have. I mean, pre-photography, did painters have this problem when photography came out in the 1800s? Were they like, fuck this thing?
No, this is exactly what this looks like.
Yeah, right? Like, yeah. And so, like, I don't think, and I talked to a patent attorney the other day, which was 6 months ago now, but she said, if you designed a water bottle and you used AI to design the straw, that you can't patent this bottle. And I was like, well, that's the dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard.
That's weird.
And because the USPTO doesn't have, and I think this is changing rapidly, but at the time, it didn't have articulation around that. It was almost like they thought it was cheating because it wasn't doing it by hand. Therefore, you can't patent it. But the guy that won the photo competition, the first global, I think it was sponsored by Sony, he won with an AI thing. And he said he did 800 prompts to get to that picture. So my first reaction is like, well, then he won. Period. Right.
Yeah, he did
and they're
work.
like,
yeah, clearly.
Because like that's his paintbrush. His paintbrush was exploring the medium, and the medium in this case is text prompt. That doesn't diminish the artistic value. It certainly doesn't diminish the metacognitive component, as it were, like the thinking about how you think about this thing, right? Like that actually shows a very sophisticated, very developed metacognitive pathway on that person. And I think that doubles down his winning that competition. He relinquished the prize and called it out as like basically the artwork itself was you guys choosing me to win and me telling you to fuck off. Like, right? Like that was the art week. It wasn't about the picture. But it opened up this like conversation. How did this guy win? And they were all horrified. I'm like, no, you knew that. If you didn't know that was going to happen, then you weren't paying attention, or you didn't understand this. And so, yeah, I think it's awesome that you got on this label. That makes all the sense in the world to me. And I'm actually a little bummed for you that you didn't triple down on that. You're like, oh, I'm going fucking whole hog, you know?
I'm releasing 7 albums tomorrow.
I see where you're going, and I think there's an admirable piece of that. But at the same time, like, it's like, hey, maybe you just found your canvas, dude. You know what I mean?
So yeah, I want to get back to where we're doing concerts with full groups of people here.
Yeah, and so the next step, and I relate to everything you said. You know, graphic design background. You know, it was '98, and they were still teaching by hand. And there was just a night class called computer graphic design where we're learning PageMaker. And then, you know, I moved to San Francisco and everyone's using Quark. And I'm like, what's Quark?
Yeah.
So that whole, and then I got into Flash. And that's essentially how I learned computer programming, was through Director and Flash, those types of artist-friendly interfaces, which slowly introduced me to programming.
Even though lingo is not an actual language, just like, just to be,
Actually, I have a deep love for lingo. That was one of my first.
I do too. I wish that somebody else would have adopted it, but technically, in technically strict terms, it's not a programming language.
Yeah, the person who created it is he's an instructor at the grad program that I went to at NYU.
Oh, that's awesome.
His name's John Henry. It's
I took to that like a fish to water, dude.
Yeah, totally. I love it.
The first book I took a 2-week summer class that I thought was a throwaway class on Director, and I literally abandoned my entire major 24 hours after I started taking that class. I was like, nope. Yep, it's all digital from here on. Yeah, nope. I ate the blue pill or whatever it was. Like I'm like, I'm out. I'm done. I'm like, this is it.
I ate both pills.
I ate both pills. And I took yours too and his. I punched the old lady in the face and took hers. I'm taking everybody's. Yeah, no, 100%. No.
But the other thing you bring up, which is an important construct, is this idea of, if I make something that makes its own things. So I call those generative containers. So I create the parameters, I shape the room, but I don't directly control of what unfolds inside of those walls. And so the first instance with that was with this app, you know, creating these generative algorithms and this AI and this learning model, which then would make music. But I'm not writing the notes. I just write the rules in which the notes get created. I create the container, and then something else is poured into that container and becomes the creation. So the next step with that was working with dancers. So I wanted to work with people again, and I'd met a dancer from Berlin who was interested in using motion sensors to create music through her motion.
Well, that's fascinating.
So she had worked with motion sensors before where she controlled the lights, but she was still dancing to music. And her desire was, I want to be the composer. I want my motion to create the music. And as we were talking about this app that I made, the app, I was already dynamically assembling music in real time based on an algorithm. And so it wasn't a far jump to then dynamically assemble music based on motion, motion data from a motion sensor. So we dove into that, tried a bunch of different motion sensors. And again, it was a generative container. I created the walls around it. I worked with her to develop a sound kit. There were sounds that she liked, and it would feel good for her that when she moved her body, it would produce these sounds. So each dancer is different. And so the actual performance is all improv, because the system is built that whatever movement she does, it's going to look cool and it's going to sound cool. So that's the work we do ahead of time. But the actual performance is just whatever life is telling her that's where that Taoism thing comes back in. It's like, what does that moment of performance tell her to do? So it's not this thing of, I've got this performance and it's going to be 10 minutes long and I've got these steps I'm going to do and these different moves and I'm going to do it no matter what. So that's a more traditional way of performing. Practice, rehearsal, perfection. This system is, what am I feeling from the audience in this moment? So it's a difference between improv or something like jazz or, a long improv solo at a Fish concert, or someone moving into this improv space. What is this moment telling me what to do? And again, it's wanting to get to that moment of creation. This was a lesson I learned continually from both hallucinogens and meditation. The answer isn't what I was practicing yesterday or last week. It's, I'm in this performance right now, and what is the universe telling me to do? What is this vibe or this connection I'm feeling with the audience or the people around me or my bandmates? What is supposed to come out of me? And so that's what was happening with the dancers. And so I create the system, I'm on the sidelines, and they're performing it. And I see what happens is that they feel like they have a superpower. They move and music comes out of the speakers. They are able to control vibration in the air through their movement. And what this started creating was my first experience of witnessing a biofeedback loop.
That must have been fucking awesome, by the way.
Yeah, that must
Jesus
be
Christ.
crazy.
Powered.
Yeah, fuck.
So,
that sounds
and
amazing.
you have that video up on your website, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, the number of performances. So it was Jadi Komboni. She was the woman in Berlin. There's also a performance from Ty Wells. He's this dancer in Los Angeles. Phenomenal. I mean, he moved so fast. With him, the performance that's up on YouTube, we met in my apartment in LA and just put the motion sensors on him, and he kind of moved around, got a sense of it, and we chose some sounds. The next performance, we went to the gallery that we were going to be performing in. And we went the day before, so it was quiet. I usually get footage not at the performance because there's a bunch of people around and it's noisy. But, it's from the rehearsal. Just his second time using it, he did this incredibly articulate, beautiful performance. And what I was learning was that this biofeedback loop, if I move and I hear a sound and I do a different type of movement and I hear a different type of sound, it's so much fun that the wiring that happens, very similar to taking a drug, the neural pathways get created so quickly because it's so much fun and it's so empowering. So if you do this, and like the speed in which a dancer learns to use that system is incredible. It's so fast. And so these dancers would do this, and they would do these incredibly beautiful performances that looked like they had been practicing a long time, but they are just improvising with the tool, using technology that enhances and amplifies their natural ability.
And that everything you just said is exactly what I was tapping into a minute ago, which is like that makes them, in my mind, that much better at their job, that they are able to sort of incorporate that. Because that means that they're really in tune with the thing, right? Like it's like they're not just, I know a lot of people that have played a lot of instruments, and a lot of them are just trying to be, the Slash playing Sweet Child of Mine. Well, guess what? Slash is the only guy who can do that, right? Like you can play your own version, but like stop trying to be somebody else. And like when you hear stories like this and you see that in motion, you're like, no, these people aren't trying to be anybody. They're just being the absolute best version of themselves that could possibly exist.
Yeah.
And that's super cool. I have such a geeky hard on for people who are like that fucking good at what they do. I'm like, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I was standing on the sidelines watching them do this, and I had a bit of envy of like they, I'm a so-so dancer. Like, I'm all right in the club, but like I'm working with these dancers who are incredible. And so I'm watching them experience this really powerful biofeedback loop. And so the next step of this was two things. One was I had this really lucid dream about making music from DNA sequences. And so I woke up and I wrote it down and I looked it up on nih.gov, and I saw this header at the top that said primary assembly. That became the project name. And I started thinking about, how do I make music from information inside the body, not from motion, but from inside. So the first step was making music, just like you were mentioning Dead Mouse and looking at the different notes. I took DNA sequences from NIH, from the human genome, and started mapping them to Ableton. It's these sequences, these drum patterns and melodies that are from DNA. And while I was working on that, I saw an ad for a Muse headset. It was on Instagram. And I saw it and I was like, is that Bluetooth? Yes. Is this something I can get access to? Yes. Is it something that's affordable? Yes. I ordered one. I got it. 36 hours later, I changed my motion sensor code to accept data from the headset. And I put on the headset, I put the app on my desk and I plugged it into my modular synth. And if I could drop or amplify a certain brainwave in my head, it was going to do a MIDI note on and a MIDI note off on this synthesizer in front of me. So I'm not touching it. So I'm standing across the room and I'm looking at this synth. So I put on this headset and focus in and, hit start and listening to my brain, ... and then beep. And I played a note on a synthesizer with my, so it was that first eureka moment of, this is telekinesis. This is me doing telepathy with a robot. You get into this transhumanist theme of, I am integrating with a machine, just like the dancers are with these motion sensors and whatever's producing the music, Ableton or Octatrack. I'm integrating my biology with a machine in this transhumanist, where I'm enhancing my abilities as a human to be able to create as an artist through a machine, through technology. So I'm not using technology to doom scroll and check out and numb out. I'm using technology to become a mirror to my humanity. So I fall in love with being human again. So I feel this sense of awe and amazement of, hey, God, I've got this brain, I've got this body, I can create. I'm so grateful to be here. And so this initial aha experience led to doing techno sets. I did a tour. And at first I was just interested in, can I do full techno sets with my brain, not touching it, like a kind of a telekinetic techno. And what I didn't expect was the power of these biofeedback experiences, or if you're using brainwaves, it's neurofeedback. And even at my second show, so it's the second show ever, I'm sitting on stage, I'm meditating, I'm making beats, I'm shaping them. And as I get deeper and deeper in meditation, the techno song gets dubbier and deeper, and it starts to feel dreamier. And haptics is a part of it. So Matt, when you mentioned listening to music and turning it up, part of the reason we turn up music is we want to feel the bass hitting our body. Because when bass waves hit our body, it pushes all the water molecules in it at a rhythm. And that's what inspires us to move, is these particles and these molecules are being pushed by these bass waves. And that's why bass feels good, particularly rhythmic bass. So I'm doing this techno set. My brain is hearing itself shape the techno in real time. And I just go down, down, down into this deep meditation. And I start to dream. I'm on stage and I've gotten so relaxed, I start to dream. And I didn't know at the time, but I'd entered a theta state, like a deep theta state.
Like almost that monk level state.
Yep. And this is in the course of a 15, 20-minute techno set in front of a crowd. I'm the technologist. I have to make sure everything's working. It's a high stress environment. People are watching me.
Yeah.
And I'm able to get to a theta state that quickly through a neurofeedback loop. And so I open my eyes eventually, and I open my eyes and I see people, and I'm like, oh shit, I'm at a show.
I'm like, fuck, I'm actually.
Does the music just dive off?
Yeah, it lost its bass. And so I get together and wrap up the set, and have to get ready for a Q&A, and but it really impressed upon me. I'd never been that relaxed at a show before, ever. So I'd gone deeper, and so what the music allowed me to do was ladder down. And so normally with meditation, I can go one step down the ladder. But if I go down one step down the ladder and then the music goes down one step, I can then go 2 steps down. And then the music goes 2 steps down. And then I can go 3, 4. So I can get deeper and deeper if I'm being led by the music that my brain is controlling.
And that's, as you said before, almost showing yourself the mirror, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And then that's probably the foundation for the electro psychedelic thing too, because you're like, well, fuck,
revealing.
Can I ask you a weird tech question? I don't know how to articulate this, but on a piano, if you just hit black notes, that pentatonic scale, you can't really hit a wrong note. You know what I mean? Like you could just bang away like a monkey and it still sounds okay. Mm-hmm. When you're setting up the sound kits for these dancers and maybe even your dream thing, are you kind of having to do a similar thing so that no two notes feel disjointed or whatever? I don't know how to articulate the question, but that's
I think that's pretty clear. Yeah.
I map the notes to specific scales, so all the output sounds harmonious, unless I'm trying to sonify stress or discord, and then I can choose notes that are out of scale or detune it, so you can hear the stress in the music.
And how are you mapping that? Are you understanding what that looks like on a brainwave,
a certain brainwave pattern?
Yeah, like you're saying like this frequency equals stress, so we're going to put in like a minor note or whatever,
Yeah, with the muse, stress would come out as a few different ways. One is you can look for muscle spikes, so pick up on muscle tension in the forehead. The muse picks that up quite well. And some softwares try to filter that out and consider it noise. I consider it a legit biometric because it's muscle tension.
For sure.
It means that the person is furrowing their brow. The other way to pick up stress, and usually you can see this with people that have post-traumatic stress, is just the amplitudes are really high across the board. And it shows that their brains are operating in overdrive, pedal to the metal, out of gear, because their brains are trying to assess for threat. They're not able to relax. Whereas if someone is a meditator, you can see that the brain is running much more efficiently And so the amplitudes across the entire spectrum are just much lower. And so that's a way
lower, or like lower peaks and valleys, or lower meaning like more homogeneous, like so the delta between the peaks and the valleys are like more compressed. Like, I mean, what?
The amplitudes are lower. Yeah, the overall output, because
the overall output. Okay.
Yeah, it's showing that the whole system is operating more efficiently using less energy.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Jason, I want to ask, is there any way we can play with this software that you made?
Like, where do I?
I want to hear what my brain sounds like.
I've been working. I've done dozens of iterations over the last several years, and most of them involve, creating a version of the software which then connects to Ableton. Mm-hmm. I did create an iPad version for that pilot program at the middle school I mentioned earlier, which later led to a collaboration with the Metropolitan Museum of Art using a very similar app.
Oh, cool.
And that was pulling the music from a gadget app. So it's sending MIDI over. So what I'm doing right now is the work to combine everything into one app, where I've got the sounds and the brain processing with one app. So I can just send you a link and everything works.
Nice.
So
that's very cool.
I would say coming soon.
So what happens, and really, I love these videos. You had two, and I think they were friends, who were both sitting there with the headbands, and they actually physically touched. Yeah. And it almost, like, you don't see the brain waves of each of them, but it almost felt like they had this collective consciousness kind of response within those brain waves.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something I've been exploring this year, synchrony.
Yeah.
That was my first experience with it. And I had two friends wearing EEGs, and their brain waves together were outputting a combined composition, and each of them had a DMX theater light shining on them, and the colors showed their stress or their relaxation.
Oh, that's cool.
And what I saw was that when they physically touched, it's just physics. It was just completing a circuit. So the electricity from one person came into the electricity of the other person, and then the EEG picked up on that. And so it was this first step into exploring synchrony of what does it take to get people to sync up.
Did they sync up, like, mathematically? If you looked at the charts, did you see that there was an actual, like, sync between those two when that happened? Like, did that?
The brain waves between them at that point were indistinguishable.
Wow.
Yeah.
That
crazy.
Is so crazy.
That's wild. And think about the implications that you discover with that about, like, two people in love, two people
like even
in
mob
hate.
mentality,
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. So many things, so many lessons that you're like, oh, look, I just
there
codified
is this,
what's fucking happening.
Non-physical thing that we're all subject to.
Yeah.
God,
if you look at murmuration, or it's also called flocking, like how the birds know to all turn at the same time, or schools
Those
of
videos
fish.
are always amazing.
Yeah, they're phenomenal. More recent work with synchrony was I was talking to a neurotherapist in Iowa that he used to work with therapists and talk to them about their issues. And then he realized also did neurofeedback work. If he can just get sensors on them and get their alpha waves to sync up, it doesn't matter what their issues are. They fall in love again and they work it out. So his work is just focused on getting people to sync their alpha again.
And what's he using? Like, what modalities he using to kind of do that?
I don't know if it was a visual or a simple sound. I know a lot of available softwares on the market, you'll just hear a tone go up.
Oh, I see.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're in sync, you hear the tone. When you're out of sync, you don't hear the tone. So it's
like a heart math product or something. Yeah.
That's crazy.
And then the next step in synchrony, this is something I did at the Smithsonian Hirshhorn this summer. It started in Iowa, which is my home state, as a Iowa Arts Council project. Did the research and development, did a performance, and then took it to DC. And I was in the final iteration, I was using 6 Muse headsets. And one of the issues I had with the one that you mentioned where the two people touched is that they didn't know what musical notes came from their brain. And that was a challenge. Because I was joining their data together, and the joint data was making the composition.
Yeah.
And so my challenge with this new system was, I want to work with 6 people, and I want each person to know when they are relaxing and their brain is contributing to the composition. So what I did is I took 3 people were assigned to the left speaker, 3 people were assigned to the right speaker. And then based on position, one had the low notes, one had the middle notes, one had the high notes.
So almost like an orchestral arrangement, pretty much.
Exactly.
Like, here, we're going to put the tubas over here. We're going to put...
So I called it a brainwave symphony.
Yeah.
And so what I was able to hear was so I was not wearing a headset in these performances, which was a bit of a relief because I can just be the technologist. I can just make sure everything's working.
Sure.
Because it's hard to make sure everything's working and meditate, which is what I usually
I don't know how the fuck you pull that off, man. Like, yeah.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
I listen to the music, and that's something I tell people, and like the biofeedback sound baths is, if you get lost and if you get stressed out, just listen to the music. The music will take care of you, which we've all experienced, like during trips and big sound systems. It's I'm freaking out. It's like, just go listen to the music.
Well, even Ariel said that. Like, she said, even if your meditation sucks, just listen to the sounds that you're hearing, and sure enough, it'll guide you back to where you're supposed to be. Yeah.
One of the most profound muse stories I have is with my daughter, who was like 7 at the time, how do you describe meditation to a 7-year-old? Like, you just can't. But birds, she understood. So I put it on speakerphone. I put a blindfold on her, and I was like, the only thing I knew how to say was listen to your breath, breathe in through your nose, and just like your reverse straw, just listen to the whoosh. Damn it, if she didn't get a bird chirp after like 20 seconds, and then as soon as it chirped, I was like, see that thing? Do that again. Whatever you did in your brain, go to the same place you were just at, and that a kid understands.
That's right.
Like that a child absolutely can sound. Now, she hadn't played with the Muse in a long time. I finally got a new headband because mine was broken. Fuck if she didn't put that thing on, and 30 seconds later, birds everywhere. I'm like, damn it. Like, but it's because she knows how to do it.
Yeah, but like I even purchased the Mind Lift package, right? And I was going to use it clinically. And while I was letting the kids kick the tires, you don't know how frustrating it was that I've been using Muse for like years.
Yeah.
And the kids get on Mind Lift and they're like, all right, make the monkey climb the vine.
Yeah.
And right up. And I was like, I sat there for 20 minutes. He went up 3 steps.
Yeah.
There's something to that. I mean, consistently at these performances or workshops that I'll do, kids just don't have a judgment of what their brains are doing. You give it to an adult and they're like, oh, what's my brain going to sound like? It's going to sound like death metal or like a Merzbow Japanese noise set or whatever, but kids put it on. They're just curious.
Yeah.
So they don't have that layer of, I'm not an artist. My brain is messed up. I'm not this, I'm not that. And so a lot of what we're doing here is unlearning those types of messages that we've at some point picked up either through our teens or adult.
That's crazy.
The other, the thing of the Smithsonian, I would have these workshops with 6 people at a time. I was supposed to do 6 originally, so 3 on Saturday, 3 on Sunday. But people would be walking by and they would see these people meditating, making music together. Another thing, this is why I like working with the Muse quite a bit, is also has that heart rate sensor. And so it's taking their joint heartbeat and emanating it from a subwoofer in the middle of them. And so then they get
that was your bass drum or something.
Exactly. And so people would walk by and see these people creating this music together, and they would line up. And so I ended up doing 25 workshops instead of 6, just back to back, because people kept queuing up.
Yeah.
And this was not an ideal setting. It wasn't a quiet room. It wasn't dim. It was in a museum. I think there was 19,000 people came to the museum that weekend because there's this big sound festival called Sound Scene, completely packed. There's other audio installations, so you're hearing crazy sounds from these other completely unideal situation or meditation or a deep state. Even with that, people within 10 minutes sitting there listening to them making music, their friends making music, strangers making music, people would describe they would lose track of time. They forgot where they were. And a number of people wept. They described it as transcendent, or they talked about this new level of intimacy where they would hear a friend's biometrics and they just were brought to tears hearing their friend's brain and their friend's heart. And so it's this form of intimacy that is emerging from using this technology in this way. And, for me to go from, I'm the only person wearing it, I'm the performer, and start putting it on other people and having them experience these. Because, I had that deep meditation I had mentioned. That same tour in 2019, I was at an outdoor festival, and it was a very trippy festival. Just the energy was very heightened. It's called Even Further. It was named after the Ken Kesey Further bus. And I did one of these brainwave techno sets. And instead of going down into a state, I started to spiral up. And as I got more excited, the music got more excited, which made me more excited. And I just went up, 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 up into a complete transcendent state of awe, just staring into the sun of the universe, like blown away by how amazing life is, sober trip. And I got so overwhelmed, I just started weeping. And as these tears were coming up, I thought, like, should I get off stage, go into the woods, like cry like a madman and get it out of my system and then come back? But I thought, no, this is what I signed up for. Like, I'm doing this to be more vulnerable in front of people, because for years I performed with drum machines and synthesizers. And as long as you turn the knobs and hit the buttons at the right time, people don't know if I'm bored or if I'm scared or if I'm tired or if I'm
checking
happy.
your email.
Yeah,
you're like, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But with this system, they know exactly what I'm feeling because it's coming out in music.
It's such a raw and vulnerable statement, man. I fucking love that.
Let me ask you something with the heart rate thing.
Yeah.
Did you tell people that was driven by the heart rate? Did you tell them like, okay, so because I would have been curious to see, even if you didn't know, do people's heart rates start to align?
Yeah, would that come to like a
right
coherence as well? Yeah,
they do. No, something that came out of my grad work at NYU was this biofeedback sound bath format. So I was doing techno shows, and one of the things with techno shows and this type of performance is that if I'm sitting on stage, I'm having an amazing experience. What am I expecting of the audience? I'm expecting them to watch me have an amazing experience. So I was challenged by my thesis advisor to consider, is there a way to change the format to invite those people in? And so I started doing these sound baths, borrowing on this metaphor of sound bath, that people are lying down. It's okay to close your eyes. You don't have to be standing watching. You don't have to be an audience member like that. You can relax and be part of the experience. So even though in most of the sound baths, other people aren't wearing the headset, what I found is because I'm amplifying my biometrics, so everyone hears my heartbeat, and then these drones and this very specific sound design that I created to help people get down into a theta state, that deep monk, creative, subconscious state, their brains and their hearts sync with mine because my biometrics are being amplified through a sound system. And just like murmuration or flocking, it's like, who's the lead bird? Who's the lead fish?
Who are we queuing off of?
And who are we going to sync up with? And so people would share with me afterwards that they would try to do these techniques to get their heart to do something different, to speed up or slow down. But no matter what, it just kept syncing up with mine over and over and over. And you'll see these people, I've got footage of all the sound baths. Some people try to like stay seated and meditate and make it through the entire sound bath. If you kind of scrub through and, fast forward, you see a couple of people sitting. Most people start lying down, and then just one by one, they just drop like flies. It's just
they just break.
20 minutes,
That's
30
awesome.
minutes. And so they all end up syncing up. And I am too. I'm starting to like curl over and crumple up because, I'm getting more and more relaxed and I want to lie down because I start seated. But that's where I really started to look at synchrony, that by amplifying my heart and my mind, other people start to sync up with it.
I see so many awesome benefits of this, like the syncope is like cool. The teaching people who don't know what meditation is, like that's awesome. I mean, there's just so many cool things. What do you do with it all? Like, right? Like, I mean, it seems like you're neck deep in this now. Like what's your line of sight look like on what we can do with it next?
One of the biggest challenges is, that's why I started this work. And that is what keeps me engaged, is that there's so many cool things. Like there's so many directions I can go with it. I have explored, I've done incubators and looked at, talked to investors and VC. They want a very specific outcome. They're like, let's, how are we going to do this and help people?
Well, they want to sell it eventually too.
They want to sell it. They want to flip it as fast as possible.
Look, Jason, no lie, I have an idea that I've been kicking around in the back of my head, and I didn't have one piece. And everything you've said, I'm like, oh my God, I would love to be able to do something like this in a more clinical setting. As a people can come in and experience this.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good
therapy,
point.
as a group therapy.
Right. Yeah, Jason's talking about it as like a as almost an empathetic art piece, but like really, how do you turn that to a therapeutic?
How can you not hear his story and not hear the emotional release?
No, totally.
We talk about this, in practice, right? Like you give a treatment, you get a treatment kind of thing, right? And it's kind of like in a group setting like that, how powerful of a tool to get that whole, however many people it is, into some kind of a coherence.
Yeah. Some of the things I'll mention, start working with, didn't expect this, just when I was thinking of, obviously there's neurotherapy. So there's therapists who are already trained in using EEGs and they've got software that they already use. So creating a more musical experience, integrating it with something like Muse and their software.
Can you get your hands on any of that stuff, or is it just too pricey to get your hands on it? Because it'd be dangerous in your hands, man. That'd be cool to see what you could do with it.
Clinical EEGs?
Yeah, like any of those like tools that they're using.
Man, if NASA, MIT, Harvard, they're all using Muse, it's a solid piece for an amazing price point, is what I think. It's not a plug just because we're ambassadors for them.
No, it's a very good price, and the amount of sensors you get is great because you get heart, you get motion. I've got these other headsets here. I've got the Neurasi, I've got the Enophones. They all have their affordances. They all have their pros and cons. But most of my development has been with Muse because of the accessibility.
And they've been at least from what I can see, they've been so open with everything and so willing. And even Ariel was like, when we spoke to her, she's like, you got an idea, just let us know.
Yeah. She's like, just send an email to the regular email and put a note that says for Ariel. And like, that's it. And I'm like, it can't be that simple.
I mentioned like, hey, so I set somebody up for acupuncture. I'd just like to see what the brainwaves are doing, because we have some studies that are showing that you're supposed to drop into a meditative state within 10 minutes of acupuncture.
I agree.
Let's see what that looks like.
Acupuncture yesterday, it definitely dropped.
Yeah, man.
I hope to meet with her next week in New York. So I listened to your show and it reminded me that I exchanged emails with her back in like
Is there
July.
A show or something, a conference or something you're going to? Or
I'm not sure why she's in town, but I'm finishing my semester and then there will be the group shows and the winter show for the ITP program. So I think it would be a great opportunity because I've been integrating the Muse into the curriculum as much as possible. So I help students use Muses with a JavaScript framework I made so they can make their own music or make their own
That show open to
graphics.
Public?
It is.
Why did we just sell 57 Muse headbands in New York City to the same address?
I got an idea why she wants to meet up. You're great for business.
That's cool. What happened there? Yeah. But I love that you need somebody that open to do what you're doing, man, because honestly, there's so many people and I don't want to throw them under the bus, but I kind of have to. But we were trying to do a project with Aura Ring, and they started out super open. And it was like literally I emailed the CEO on LinkedIn and he got back to me right away. But the second I think they realized that it wasn't like I wasn't there to buy 4,000 rings, like the conversation went ghosted, right?
See you later. Yeah.
And I'm like, look, we weren't going to be your retirement plan for sure. I never warranted that. We weren't going to get you to your Series B funding. I get it. But like, look at the other side of that. Look what Ariel does and look at people like you who came out of that cauldron.
That's right.
Versus these other guys like who basically Heisman'd you and you're like, all right, well, I guess I don't have access to that. So, and
Muse is basically turning everybody into fanboys because they're just, God, like every time I send out an email and they're like, hey, we work with this now, I'm buying that. Like, I didn't even ask. I'm on Alpha Beats now. Why? Because you guys make a great product and anything you support, I want to support.
But there was a brief period where they pulled their SDK. So it was at the beginning of the pandemic. I'm guessing they learned from that because a lot of developers were like, I was working on these great projects. And, I don't have access to the SDK. It was when the 2 was coming out. For me, it was helpful because when I lost access to, I was moving from the Muse 1 to the Muse 2. I wanted to use the 2 because if I could use heart rate, I could set the tempo of techno sets to my live heart rate. And so what I did was I hacked into it. So because the SDK wasn't there, I learned how to hack into it as a generic Bluetooth device And I learned how to do the EEG processing. So the fast Fourier transforms, slicing up the different brainwave frequency bands, and then getting those values. And the more I learned about the intricate process rather than the software doing it and doing it myself in my own code, I was able to learn better musification methods.
Right. Sure. How could you not? Right. And that's what we were talking about at the top of the show, right? Like there's no sort of visibility to do that level of experimentation anymore because you don't have to. There's a library, there's a download, there's a sample set, there's a whatever. Like I don't have to think anymore. I just, and like you have an infinitely, I would imagine, better understanding than what's going on. And granted, you're looking at it through a different lens, but you probably in some respects know that better than the engineers do, right? Because you just have this like, you had to dive in. And again, they're looking at it through a completely different lens.
Yeah, it's almost like a gift that they took away from the SDK. Because now you learned how to, I don't need that anymore. I can get it.
And they did bring it back. So
yeah, of course. Yeah. But like, that's such a huge creative like reality going into this post-AI world that we're moving into right now, right? Like transparency with these technologies, like, you couldn't do what you're doing without that machine and access to that machine. You could probably have found other ways to do it, but like this certainly made that easier. And the less friction you have, almost the easier you can just iterate and create, right? And so
if Muse headsets were $5,000, I wouldn't have gotten started.
Correct.
Yeah. If they were $2,000, I mean, there's no way I would do group synchrony because I have to buy a headset.
Yeah, you're
in 12K to get a group of 6. Yeah.
And but conversely, if they were $20, but there was no SDK, you'd also be fucked, right? Like, you could
balance.
Biohack this thing or, techno hack it and maybe get there. But if it hadn't have been for the SDK, you wouldn't have even maybe known that was a possibility, right?
Exactly.
You only did that because you're like, well, if they took away my toy, I got to rebuild the toy, right? Like, yeah, dude, it's awesome. Honestly, man, I wish we had 7 hours.
We didn't even normally, I'd like give Matt like a tap and like, hey, dude.
Yeah.
They stopped listening after an hour. And I was like, no, this is too good. This is too good.
But I love what you're doing, man. I mean, as an art guy myself, I get very inspired by stories like yours just because it's super cool that you're doing that work. And as a digital guy too, like, from Meta all the way to you now, like I'm going to use you in the same conversation as I did Meta and do. Fantastic. Because like this is sort of the state of the union with respect to like art and how do we interpret it. And there's no more line between biology and technology, right? Like, and it still exists because, we all grew up in the 80s, right? We're all the same age on this call anyway, right?
Yep.
And like, we have that sort of before and after reflection. My kids don't have that. Like, there's no difference. Like, the iPhone's not novel to them. It's just.
Yeah.
That's all it ever was.
Students who, they'd be Gen Z and they really envy the 90s. Because there's a period of time where they see that other people grew up without every step being monitored and every moment of their life being digitized. And so there's this enviable freedom we had growing up in the 80s and 90s.
Which I'm curious, does that kind of push backwards? Like when that generation raises offspring, like does that sort of roll back a little bit? Like we over-indexed one way, like do they over-index back to something?
And I see that with them. Yeah, there's a Luddite or not wanting to be on phones as much.
Right.
That's probably a good thing.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Or if you, to your point, I do like the differentiation you made between doom scrolling and evolving. Right. In one regard, I mean, I don't care if my kids use Muse and your machine all day if they were writing music. But put them on TikTok for more than 20 minutes. I'm like, put that fucking thing down or I'm going to break it. Yeah. I'm going to throw it out the window, light it on fire, run it over with my car. But I need you to get off this phone. Like, I need you to get off this phone right now. Like, I just like, but yeah, listen, man. So what's the best way to like point people in your direction? How do we spread the word? Like what do we do?
I would say a few things, my website, my personal website, jasonjsnell.com, my Instagram, which my handle is Jason J. Snell. And then my YouTube is where I document all of my performances and all of my research. So
that's awesome.
This was something right from the get-go that I knew that audio documentation wasn't enough. Like when I did techno, I'd put everything on SoundCloud. But this is also visual because you need to see what is happening to people, as they're sitting there and having these
100%.
experiences.
Yeah.
So all of it is video.
And I got to say, for anyone who listens to this and hasn't seen it, that YouTube channel is meaty.
Absolutely crazy.
There's a lot in there, man.
There's so much great stuff on there.
Yeah, it's really intense. And it's funny. I'm so glad that you said that. It gives us justification here. We just launched our YouTube channel recently, and it was for that same reason. It's like, these conversations have been moving very clearly into like a real, I hate to use this word because it's been overused, but authentic conversation with another human being. And like a lot of that's visual, right? Like how do you
how are you
lean in or
yeah.
out of a conversation? Like how animated people, we have guests that get real animated and then it gets us amplified. You're talking about going up or down a spiral. We've done that 50 times on this show. Like, right, you go up or down with the energy they bring to the party. And like, you need to see that, I think, to fully appreciate the nuance of it. And so I do appreciate that you saw that as well and kind of went there, and because it does make a big difference, obviously, especially in the synchronization side of things, like watching people kind of tumble down. You're like, yep, I get it, But cool, man. Awesome. I'll talk to you offline. I'd love to know more about that show because, sure. I actually am not.
December
we're not too far
15th
away.
and 16th. Oh, great.
Oh, that's coming up.
Yeah, that is coming up.
I'm gonna see if Ariel is gonna go, so maybe we could all meet there.
Yeah,
that'd be amazing.
I would love to. Check some of this out. So cool, man. Well, listen, thank you for sharing time with us. It was awesome.
Thank you for that.
I knew this was going to be a great one, Jason. I was so excited. Thank you.
Tom. Thanks for taking the extra time.
Hang out afterwards because just don't hang up. All right. So all right. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
You bet.
Be subversive, irreverent.
Health is wealth, but you knew that.
Everybody knows that.
But so is following us on social media at Irreverent Health. And check out our website for more exclusive content at irreverenthealth.com.
Oh, I like this.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Irreverent Health.